We are believers, we are teachers, we are all God's creatures. We are opening up the doors to our home. We cherish the moments when we see our children with faith burning strong, learning at their own paces, smiles on their glowing faces. We're caring for their education. Come and join our family at Eden Hope Academy.
Are you ready for week 12? So am I. Let's get started together, okay? Start out with our Memorize Me, and I'll read it and you read with me or follow along. Let's start. It's Matthew 6, 5 through 7, and it says, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corner to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So let's go over here to secret prayer. And it says, draw a picture of you praying in secret and God hearing you. So that's what I want you to do right here, because there is so much more to prayer than what we realize. God values our prayer, and just by praying, God says that there's a reward waiting for us in heaven just because we pray. So it's very important. So I want you guys to really think about what you're going to draw here. Maybe draw your bedroom or something like that of where you pray in secret. The next is a Star Spangled Banner and Francis Scott Key. Now that also relates to our history. So we're going to kind of do these two together. So I'm going to talk about the history part really quickly. Basically, the War of 1812 was kind of like the Revolutionary War Part 2. The colonists and England were still struggling on what this new nation looked like, and England wasn't so sure they wanted to give up those colonies. And so England was doing some things, like they were saying, well, for every ship with cargo that's going to go to Europe from the colonies, they should stop in England and pay us a tax. And the colonists were furious about this. They were really upset about this because they were saying, what are you talking about? We're a sovereign nation. We're our own nation. But then Napoleon and the British were fighting, and Napoleon was starting all kinds of conflicts, and the British needed more sailors and more soldiers. So do you remember last week or the week before last in Lord Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar? Well, that was one of the battles where they would have needed more sailors. So one of the ways they were getting more sailors is they would attack American or U.S. ships, and then they would take the sailors off, and they would say that they're British sailors and they have to fight for them. And the people from the U.S. were very upset. But from the British point of view, that we didn't really have set passports then. We didn't have a lot of national identity. And so really the way that the sailors identified themselves is that they would have eagles tattooed on them, and they would have other types of tattoos. And that was kind of their way of saying where they belonged. But it was just kind of a muddled for them, and so the British took advantage of that and got themselves some more sailors. And the Americans and the British were getting angry with each other. And then during this War of 1812, some Indian tribes, Native American tribes, got involved with fighting against some of the colonists, and then Canada got involved, and so there was this big conflict in the United States. And the British came over, and they started having more battles with the United States here on our own land. In fact, at one point, the British captured Washington, D.C., and they burned down the White House. And Dolly Madison, who was James Madison's wife, she ran into the White House as it had been set on fire, And she rescued a portrait of George Washington, which is still there today. So she was very brave in doing that. And so all of these facts, let's put them in order. Basically, British and Americans, or British in the US, couldn't decide where they stood. The British started imposing restrictions on the colony, or on the US, as if they were still colonies. Colonists got upset with it. British came back with their ships, and they started attacking, burned down some of the big buildings in DC, and they had one last decisive battle, and that was going to be the Battle of Fort McHenry in Maryland. And that was a fort that was manned by primarily women and children. So Army officers and enlisted men, they have wives and children. A lot of you guys are wives and children of people who serve in our military. And so this was a place that they were housed, that they lived at Fort McHenry. And so there weren't that many soldiers there to defend the fort, but the British were bombarding it because they felt like if they could win that fort over, then they could go in and just take back the colonies. And so it was very precarious. And the colonists, or the United States, they weren't sure what was going to happen to them. And so before that happened, there is a man named William Beans, and he was a medical doctor. And he had helped both the British and the US soldiers heal, and he had done surgeries on both sides, so he was not just one-sided in this. But nevertheless, the British took him captive, and they put him in the hull, which means the bottom part of a ship, with a whole bunch of other people from the US. And so his friend, Francis Scott Key, and another friend, so that's where we get to hear, they decided that they should go and try to get their friend Dr. Beans out of the capture of the British. Now, something to be aware of here is that the British were very good to their captives. Many countries would abuse their captives, but the British were just kind of holding them and feeding them and all, kind of waiting it out to see what would happen. But nevertheless, Francis Scott Key wanted to help out his friend. So he and his friend, Colonel John Skinner, boarded one of the British ships where Dr. Beans was being held, and they negotiated his release. And so Dr. Beans was going to be released, and the British admiral said, you can bring him out, you can leave, but you have to stay during the night because we're attacking Fort McHenry, and we're going to bombard it all night long with our bombs from our cannons, and we're going to shoot things at it all night long. And when the flag that's waving there goes down, we'll know that we've won, and then we can go and we can just take back the United States for the king. And so it was scary for Francis Scott Key and John Skinner and William Beans and the other men, because they knew that their lives would change dramatically, and they were very scared. And so all night long, as the sun began to go down, they kept watching this flag, and it was up there waving. And they kept watching and watching and watching, and then as the cannons would burst off toward Fort McHenry, they would give just a bright flash of light, and they could see the flag. And that went on all night long, until finally at the beginning of dawn, just that part where it's still dark and just a little bit of light of dawn, they saw that flag. And what they didn't know was that dads and just normal men, some of them in the military, some of them maybe not, they went and they stood and they held that flag until they were killed. And then another person went up and held that flag. They were that resolute that they felt like the United States should say the United States, that they were willing to give their lives for it. And so Francis Scott Key wrote this poem, or wrote this song, and it's become our national anthem. And it's important for you to understand what it means. So let's go through it together. It's right here on Memorize Me. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? So what did we say? That they were watching how would they have looked? Would they have been biting their fingernails, or would they have been praying to God? Or how do you think they would have looked? By the dawn's early light, they had watched all night long, so the dawn was just coming up. What so proudly we hailed at twilight's last gleaming. So the night before, as the sun went down, they were proud that that flag was still there, whose broad stripes and bright stars, that's our flag, through the perilous fight, over the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming. So the Fort McHenry has a long wall, a tall wall, that then goes down into the bay area. And so what it's saying is they were looking up a cliff, up the wall, and they could see it still waving. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? And it was truly the home of the brave, those people who held up that flag all night long. And so that's become our national anthem, and I'd really love it if you could sing it and send me a video of you singing it. That would be such a privilege. Okay, next is water cycle. This week, our water cycle is going to be so much fun in science. You're going to get a rotisserie chicken container that Costco donated to us for free, so it's totally clean, and you're going to make an ecosystem out of it. So some of the terms that you're going to learn are evaporation, condensation, participation. I have a hard time with that word. Maybe one of your moms can say that word. And collection. And then Minnesota, Oregon, Kansas, West Virginia, Nevada, and Nebraska are our states for this week. And there's some fun games at the bottom of this page that you guys can play to help you memorize your states. So for here we have Callum, who's in our Oregon campus, and we have Lauren, who is in our Reston campus. And it says, God highly values prayer. He not only listens and answers our prayer, but there's a future reward for quietly petitioning Him. And then it says, do you pray? So I want you to talk to your mom about whether you pray, and then I want you to take a couple of minutes and just pray. And you don't have to have a formal prayer. You can say, God, just hear my prayer and just be with me. That's a prayer just in itself. Okay, so we've done Francis Scott Key. Right here, I want you to draw a picture of Fort McHenry right here, and I want you to draw a picture of some British ships right here, and I want you to make a big American flag right here to show, and maybe put some Francis Scott Key stick figures on here looking at that large flag. And then if you want to get a little ahead and put these terms on, you're welcome to. I'll post them under the science, and I'll put it on our sheet so that you can if you want to, but you don't have to. But be sure to bring your books to class. All right? All right, so that's the first part. That's our book part of week 12. I look forward to seeing you during Timeline Card. I'll see you in a minute.
We are believers, we are teachers, we are all God's creatures. We are opening up the doors to our home. We cherish the moments when we see our children with faith burning strong, learning at their own paces, smiles on their glowing faces. We're caring for their education. Come and join our family at Eden Hope Academy.